Here in Scandinavia, the forest has always built our society. But now we're expecting something new from our forests, for our future, and for the entire planet.
You get really inspired when you look at trees growing this fast with the help of science and practical forestry.
As the world changes from fossil to green, everyone is calling upon the forests to do something completely new. The trees, which previously became paper and lumber, will soon be capable of making clothes, windows, and fuel for cars, boats, and airplanes. This will greatly increase wood consumption. And to have enough forests for all this, scientists must ensure the trees grow faster, and that these trees are able to do so in climates where the weather will hit us in new ways. The goal is to make these forests grow twice as fast as they do today. And the ones who will make this happen are the scientists. This challenge is of course monumental, but Tomas is optimistic that scientists and forests will be able to do their part to help the world out of the climate crisis.
You have to be hopeful for the future. I'm convinced that the human race is such a clever kind of bunch of people that we will solve the problems, even though it might look a little bit troublesome sometimes, but the solutions are there in the near future.
The forest, ancient and enormous. But now, as trees become part of the future, researchers are using the latest and most minute technology. In this super modern greenhouse, the plants are controlled as if they were astronauts. They are weighed, measured, and photographed in infrared. And all of the plants get exactly the same access to light, water, nutrition, and heat. In this way, researchers can see differences that result when they change a single gene in the trees.
We have seen that trees can grow at least twice as fast. I think it would be fantastic if we could actually achieve a level like that, but at the same time, make sure that they don't need a lot more nutrients and that they don't need a lot more water in order to achieve the same growth. Because if you can just increase the growth rates, then you need less land in order to grow the same amount of wood.
The research here can also adapt the tree's genes for a new climate, perhaps one with droughts or floods and new pests. Today, however, the focus is on growth. And here you can see examples like this.
So one of the genes we are studying here is the gene which controls how the tree responds to grow in the shade.
A tree feels when it's growing in the shadow of other trees, which triggers it to grow faster, to try to reach the light. And now scientists can control this shadow gene and deceive the tree into thinking that it is growing in the shade, even though it actually has plenty of light. This trick makes the tree grow much faster.
On my left-hand side here, we have a normal tree, which we have not done anything to. And on my right-hand side, we have just changed the activity of one single gene. We have reduced the activity of the gene which controls the tree's ability to grow in shade. And you can see that this tree grows now almost twice as fast as the tree to the left.
But it won't be Uwe's aspen trees from the greenhouse growing out in the forests, but rather firs and pines. And in order for the genes that Uwe discovers to be able to help and be put into use in future forests, researchers must know the entire genetic codes of firs and pines.
So the purpose of this project is to determine the full genome sequence of the Norwegian spruce and the Scots pine, and then to use that information in forestry breeding, and also to understand the genetics of these trees and how they would respond to the climate change.
6 years ago, these researchers did something that had never been done before. They mapped out the entire genome of a Swedish spruce tree.
So the genome size of the spruce and the pine are about 7 times or more larger than the human genome and are very complex. They don't have many more genes than we have, but they have a lot of other types of genetic material which are very hard to understand and determine the sequence of.
Now, Ulf and his team are taking the next step. They are going to do a much larger mapping to understand what all Swedish fir trees have in common, to be able to work more efficiently with genetic engineering. And also, the genes of the pine trees have to be mapped.
So this is the lab where the DNA sequencing is taking place, and the project starts with needles. And the needles we grind them up into powder and extract the DNA. And then when we have the DNA, we break it into smaller parts, and then we position these smaller pieces of DNA onto a glass slide. And this glass slide goes into these big instruments that are around me here, which are actually the sequencers. And they read all these millions and millions of small pieces of the DNA. And once we have that, we have the complete DNA sequence, but we don't have a genome. So then we have to use a sort of high-performance computer to actually assemble all these different pieces back onto the order that they existed from the beginning in the genome. And then we have a complete genome. So in this project, we will now be able to determine the spruce and the pine genomes, and it will be about 100 to 1,000 times better than just a few years ago because of the new technology that we have.
One researcher who will benefit greatly from Ulf's project is Sara Abrahamsson. Here outside of Umeå, she is researching how future forests can be made to grow to their full potential.
So what we do here with tree breeding is really we're selecting or choosing the parents for all the plants for the forestry.
Sweden has a long history with forest breeding, and here in a forest called Dag Lindgren's lecture hall, the researchers have cultivated a forest just for science.
And what you can see here is really a good example on how much different it could be, because between these it's 1 year's growth, and as you can see it's very large in between. But if you look at this one over here, the difference is much smaller. And the only difference between these trees are the genetic background. We haven't done any difference in what we have treated them with. They're planted at the same time, and there's no other difference but the genetic background.
Om du börjar där bortifrån och så kör du långsamt ut efter kanten hela vägen bort dit. Det blir väl jättebra. Ja. Det blir perfekt.
But cultivating and studying the results this way takes time, often a couple of decades. With gene technology, this can happen much faster.
The main difference for us is with this mapping is that we will be able to go in and look at a seedling that's this small and say which is going to be the one we want to choose instead of wait until they're like 15 to 20 years.
Okay, so new plants are on the way. But once the future trees are planted, how well will they do? One of the big question marks is nutrition, which the trees need to grow properly. Perhaps climate change will make it so that soil nutrient levels won't be enough in the future.
I would like to understand how the roots of the trees are taking up nutrients in the form of nitrogen from the soil.
Trees need nutrients like nitrogen from the ground to grow, but also carbon dioxide from the air. But how will that be in the future? Because as carbon dioxide levels increase in the air, the root's uptake of nitrogen needs to increase as well. But will this be possible? Is there enough nitrogen in the soil? This is a critical issue and is why Sandra is devoting her life as a scientist to understanding the roots of these pines.
Here I'm inserting this tube into the soil, and we want to mimic a plant root in order to sample what the nitrogen that the plant root will take up in the soil. And then we collect it in these tubes and we bring them to the lab and analyze it to see how much the tree would have taken up.
This research is ongoing, and so far there are no clear answers as to whether the nitrogen levels in the forests will be enough.
There are some studies which indicate that there won't be enough nitrogen in the soil to support the increased growth, but we are not sure. But we are hoping that with this technique that we will be able to answer that question.
But if there isn't enough nitrogen, the scientists still aren't completely out of options.
Det ser ju jävligt ut. Ja, vi kan gå in här. Här kan du nästan gå.
Tomas here is standing in front of a forest that has been managed in 3 ways.
This is a typical standard spruce forest with normal management, northwestern Sweden, 300 meters above sea level. So since that forest is not very vigorously growing, you can add some treatments to make it grow faster. And what we see here on the right hand, it's a fertilized spruce forest of the same age. It's actually the same stand as the one before. But here we have added nutrients that has been limiting growth quite a lot. And now you can see it's a dramatic difference, much more timber production. Actually 3 times more timber production.
Nitrogen fertilizers are one thing researchers from the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences in Umeå have been working with a lot. And they have developed a new kind of nitrogen fertilizer, an arginine fertilizer, which does not contribute to eutrophication of lakes in the same way that traditional fertilizers do. Torgny's fertilizer looks like little white balls, and the unique thing in this fertilizer are these crystals. The crystals contain the amino acid arginine. They release a little at a time and can provide a boost in nutrition for at least 1 year. In previous trials, Torgny and his colleagues have seen that the spruce and pine trees which get the arginine have much better developed root systems.
Let's look at seedlings that received this small dose of special fertilizer last year, well, exactly 1 year from now. Here is one example. Oh wow, you can directly see the difference in shoot length. And you also see the length of the needles here. The fertilized plant has much longer needles, and the size of the buds, astonishing difference. But the most interesting part is, of course, what has happened below ground. Let's have a look at the root system. Oh, wow. The new roots that are formed after planting, they are really crucial for the seedling to survive the first tough years.
And then, when the trees grow bigger, well, that makes the difference. Most of Sweden's area is forest. And of all of this, the vast majority is planted forest for production. In the old growth forests, or just undisturbed, forests left alone, the richness and diversity of species is higher, and many would say the sense of nature is greater. And one might wonder if now that the forests of the future will be trimmed, fertilized, and thinned for the greatest possible return, can we still maintain biological diversity and naturalness? The simple answer is that old-growth forests, with their richness of species, will always be different from production forests and large clearings. But to make the best of this situation, researchers are working on this as well. And one example of that, the one who flies above the forests can accidentally discover when among fir and pine suddenly appears like a small checkerboard.
Okay, so here we are at this gap shelter wood. The checkers are 30 times 45 meters, and we have planted both pine and spruce in here to see how they grow, depending on location within the gap.
The checkerboard forest is intended to be a cross between clear-cut and untouched forests.
Here we can see that we have more of this lily now because we have removed some of the mature trees. We have more sunlight, and this is a nice spot for the lilies to grow.
Forestry cares about many measurable things, the number of species and the number of trees, but also about the less tangible things, such as the actual experience of the forest.
The feeling here is a forest feeling, but still there is quite much light coming in, so it's also an open feeling. It's a nice feeling.
And as we move on, we will see how our firs and pines will be able to build tomorrow's high-tech society.
Hi there.
Hi.
You have the new samples.
Yes.
Excellent.
This is acetylation, actually.
Okay.
Much better.
Materials from trees are exciting for a number of reasons. Maybe the two most important ones are that we have a bio-based material, so the tree is synthesizing the material. It's not made in a chemical factory. And the second reason is that the performance of the materials from trees are unique. The cellulose component provides much better properties than we can achieve with any synthetic materials. So this combination is absolutely unique.
Researcher Lars Berglund and his colleagues want to make wood high-tech. And for Lars, there are hardly any boundaries as to what can be done with wood as one gains new knowledge.
For instance, eco-friendly packaging materials insulation materials for buildings. We have transparent wood, which is one example of a more high technology type of material. Wow, so this is much more transparent. Excellent. Is there a difference which wood species that work the best?
So this one is much easier than the other ones.
Okay. So I guess acetylation is the way to go.
Yes, absolutely.
And how in the world can wood become transparent, one might ask? Well, that is all thanks to advances in nanotechnology to build things on the molecular level.
I want to make the wood transparent. And this wood is really brown because of lignin. And if we remove the lignin, which is the brown color of the wood, then we can obtain something that is white. And if we fill in all the pores into this white wood, then we can obtain something transparent. And this is transparent wood.
The translucent wood can one day become whole glass facades, which can also serve as thermal batteries, storing up the heat of the day and releasing it at night. Wood can reach new, entirely unthought of areas of use, Lars says. But what he first wants to outcompete is today's use of plastics.
The use of synthetic plastics has been continuously increasing. We will see a change. There will be bio-based materials, and in particular materials from trees that are used in packaging. It will also influence building materials. I think building materials from wood will be used to a much larger extent, and because it's simply sustainable, it provides a sustainable development for society.
More and more voices are being raised for people to start living in a new way. And our forests, ancient and vast, thanks to high technology at the cellular level, at the nano level, can be part of the solution. The ones we've met today, we expect great things from, utilizing forests for totally new things: clothes, facades, fuel, and much of what we currently use plastic for. And whether or not they'll be able to grow sufficient forests in the climate of the future, we don't know that yet. But one thing is for sure: science is on the way.